All right, everybody, we're live.
Hello,
Rodrigo, take
everyone.
it.
Hello.
Let me remove this. Yeah, better.
Would you like to introduce us? Rodrigo?
Oh, sorry. I was changing something here on settings. Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure. Another webinar here with Gabriel, our CEO, sharing a little bit how to improve the way how you use our platform BWX, and also with Macarena,
Hello, everyone.
our beloved guest and co-host that will share her views about how we can improve your operation using BWX. Yeah, thank you,
Cool.
everyone.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo, for the introduction. And before we start sharing screens and digging deep into it, Maka, do you want to talk a little bit about the challenges translators have when they try to work together? I think it's interesting. I think before we talk about the solution, if we spend a little bit of time talking about the problem.
Yes, well, normally we receive maybe larger files that we need to work with colleagues, and then we face this management issue that's like, okay, how are we going to work on this together in the smoothest way possible? So, are we going to use an online tool, an offline tool? How are we going to manage translation memories, glossaries, and yeah, I think like online tools are great, such as BUX, because you can have everything online and then everything is updated instantly, and then everyone just access the tool and then it's all there. So
Cool.
it's um, it's a good solution because with offline tools, the issue, for example, is that you have to be changing files all the time, and then yeah, it becomes very unpractical.
Right. So, for instance, if we're working on a similar file, maybe I'll have entered something into the translation memory that's not available in yours. Maybe you added a term to the glossary that's not available in mine. So we get into situations where the knowledge management isn't synchronous, right? It's not, we're not working together in the same body of knowledge. I think
Hmm.
another, and correct me if I'm wrong, but another problem is cost, right? I mean, it's important to be able to do this in a cost-effective way. Some tools can be very expensive to work collaboratively with, and I think one thing to point out is that what we're going to show today is Mak and I are going to work together on the same file, and essentially, it's to do that in BWX, you would have to pay for two active users in the professional plan, which would make it around $18 a month. So a little bit more than a Netflix subscription, nothing that bad, and you get the benefits of working with teammates. All right. So without further ado, I'll share my screen, and we're gonna kick it. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, this is BWX, everybody. What I'll do is I'm going to take a step back, try to take it from the beginning. So, when you create an account in BWX, you're not going to see these projects. These projects I have created previously because this is our demonstration environment. So, for you, it will be blank. So, for the first step will be to set up an organizational unit. And when you set up an organizational unit, you can obviously name it. But one thing that's really important is that the organizational unit contains who can access that given org unit. So that given unit of project. So it's just something very important to keep in mind that if you don't add someone to that list of to that organizational unit, they won't be able to see the content. So that's a very important step in what we're showing. Um, so In this case, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a user for Maca. I'm going to add a user in my account, and I'm going to call this Maca collaboration user. And Maca, I'm going to use Macarena plus team at bureauworks.com. So you should be able to get an email for that. And now let's select the organization that we're adding this to. And see if we have any other field. It's active. And then very important, I'm going to decide the user role. For this case, I'm going to give Maca a project manager role because I want to collaborate with her in a more flexible way. We can go into this later, but I could also add Maca as a vendor, but then I would have to allocate tasks to her because today the goal is to show how we can work together kind of seamlessly in the same project. I'm going to give her the project manager role. So far, so good. Maca, any questions?
So far, so good. I am
Okay.
writing here a brief summary and sharing it on screen.
Yeah, and one thing that's important is as far as accounts that I'm filling, you won't see this. It's just here because I'm a system admin. So let me go ahead and save this user. Perfect. So I created this user, and Mac as a project manager. One thing that's very interesting about BWX too is that I gave her a generic role of project manager, but I can go in and give Maca very specific permissions when we work together. So if we go into a project, for instance, I can allow Maca to approve a project or to change the status of the project or not. I can allow Maca to see the project list for that organization, an organizational unit. During the translation process, I can allow Maca to update or not a translation memory with the glossaries as well. I can allow Maca to create or add or not terms or change terms. So you can create users with different kinds of very, very granular roles so that whenever we work together, let's say, for instance, I can create a user that has more rights and a user has less rights. So just as an example, let's say I work with Maca, but Maca is a much better translator than I am. She gets to add terms to the glossary. Maybe I don't. She gets to change terms in the glossary. Maybe I don't. So it's something that's I find particularly useful of BWX is that you can decide exactly how each user is going to work. Maca, by the way, did you get the invitation? In your email?
Yes, but I need to set a password.
Okay.
Not sure why.
No, because it's a new account. That's why.
Ah, okay. Yeah, but it's not loading.
Hmm?
I'm not sure why.
What do you mean, Maca?
Yeah, the page is not loading. I will try again.
Okay, I'm going to continue here. So as far as the projects go, if I create a new project, I'm going to select a file, in this case our homepage. I'm going to click on next, hit on continue. And now I'm going to select the work unit, the organizational unit that we created. So we're going to select BWX as the organizational unit. Now, because I selected the organizational unit, now we have the source and the target languages. Now, when I select demo collaboration as an example, and I can add at this level more translation memories as an example. I can add more glossaries also as an example. And if I go into next, I'm going to define the workflow. So in this case, let's say I just want a simple translation and review workflow. Perfect. And now that I've created the project, one thing that's really important, so this project belongs to this organizational unit. I just clicked on it, and if I go into associations, I'll notice that Maca isn't here. So if I search for Macarena collaboration user, and I add this user. So now this user is in the organizational units. Supposing that Maca can log in, she'll be able to see the project that I just created. So far, any questions? And Maca, were you able to solve that or no?
No, I'm still trying to create a password.
Okay, I'll move on. And let's see here. Let's create the homepage. So let's take a look at the project we just created. This is the organizational unit. Let's change the name. Mhm.
Can you try sending the invitation again, maybe?
You should just be able to reset the password, Maka. Even if you don't need the new invitation, you can just go. I think maybe it's because you're not typing in the email that I created. So if you go into users, and the email that you should type to reset password is macarena+team@BWX.com.
Okay.
But if not, don't worry about it. We'll troubleshoot later. For the purposes of the demo, it's all good. So now I'm going to filter by my organizational units. Oh. And let me just change the filter here. Perfect. So this is the project that we just created. Notice that it calculated the cost automatically based on the project automation that we ran. And it created the project with all of the target languages that I wanted. But maybe Mac and I were just going to collaborate in Spanish. Then I would just create a project that was just in Spanish. So let's just go through the steps again. If I were to select the file, I'm going to select my homepage. I'm going to next. When I select my organizational units, it'll preload these languages, but I can remove, for instance, Chinese and French and German and Italian and Japanese and Portuguese, and let's say just work with Spanish as an example. Again, define the translation memories and the glossaries. I'm going to continue. Now I can also change the workflows again. So let's go into translation and review only in this case. And now we've created the project. Now, again, it's creating the workflows, it's going to run the automation, and we're going to have the cost calculated over here. Now, it's in this case, it's $62.99, and I can define the cost based on the parameters that I define in my pricing. So whatever pricing I decide here and the pricing coefficients, that's what's going to determine the overall project cost. So what's going to happen is both Mac and I now have access to, supposing that Mac is logged in, both of us have access to the same file. So now when I click on this file, and again, a very important step is, in this case, I do have my AI turned on. And when I click on any given segment, it's going to look at my translation memory, it's going to look at my machine translation, and it's also going to look at my glossary. And I'm going to turn on the web preview and go here to BWX.com. So now I have the English sentences on the left. I have the Spanish translations on the right, and I have the preview going on over here, right? And Mac, I'm going to go on like this, but if you have any updates on your end, let me know, and then I can change. But one thing that I do want to emphasize, and I did a webinar last week, and it became increasingly clear to me just how subtle some of these concepts are. So talking particularly about our artificial intelligence. I'm going to turn it off for a second. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to turn off translation smells. I'm going to turn off AI review and AI translation. Okay. So now I'm left with a regular, or let's say regular translation editor. With a regular translation editor, and let's click here as an example. I'm the translator, and I see. Okay, I have a. Let me go to a segment that I don't have a match for. So maybe over here. Perfect. This is a good example. So I don't have a match here, and I look at the machine translation, and I look at the glossary, and I say the machine translation says, cree tantos glosarios y memorias de traducción como desee. But the glossary says that you should be vos in this case. And now I'm left as a translator, I would be like, just as an example, I would have to maybe apply this machine translation and then apply vos, deseas, and change the verbiage. And then there's a possible spell check over here, and I'll accept it or not, and so on. But all the, let's say, the decision making between me and the machine translation and the glossary is taking place by my own doing, right? Now, if I turn on the AI, let's turn on the AI translation here. Now something different is going to happen. So now if I click, if I click again on this segment, now what's going to happen is, notice that the feed changed, right? So the machine translation was saying cree tantos glosarios y memorias de traducción como desee, but the AI is suggesting crea tantos glosarios y memorias de traducción como desees, because it's implying the use of the pronoun vos en lugar de usted. So that's something really cool, right? It's like, as me as a translator now, instead of having to implement that change manually, I already have a feed that's taking these things into account, right? So if I were to confirm this segment, now it's going to be written in the translation memory. It's going to pick up on a glossary mismatch because the pronoun is implied. I'm going to accept this. Now, I'm going to turn on yet another component in the AI. I'm going to turn on the translation smells component. So let's go back here and turn on the translation smells. Perfect. So now let's go back and confirm the segment. Now the smells is running. Now let's say, for instance, I omit the word memorias. Just let's see what happens. Smells is okay with that. Let's delete the word glosarios. And now Smells is picking up an error and saying the translations tantos y traducción is incorrect. The correct translations should be tantos glosarios y memoria de traducción. So now we have an additional verification layer that's taking place. So the AI is both suggesting something that makes more sense based on the translation memory and the glossary, and the translation smells component is picking up on potential deviations in meaning, right? And I'm going to stop here, Rodrigo, ask if we have any questions from our guest today.
Let me see. So far, uh, no questions. So
Any
yeah,
questions from you or Maka?
no. I was just wondering when we you were covering about, so we can add one user in our account. So, but the billing part, it will be connected to the main user, or that will be separated.
Yeah,
The,
that's a great question. So if we go back to BWX and you go into my account, you'll see here how many seats you have available and how many seats you have active. So in my plan, I have 62 active seats, but I have 2,000 seats available. So I can add users until I reach the 2,000 quote number. But if I click on Manage Plan, here I can select the plan that I want, and I can add users and check out, and then that will reflect back in my account. So basically, if you go into settings, my account, you can add or remove users and change plans as necessary. Yes, and as far as billing, the billing always goes to the account holder. So whoever owns the account.
okay, got it.
Great question. Now,
Gabriela, and can we
yeah,
leave comments while translating? Do we have that feature?
yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So, like, let's say, for instance, I'll fix this, and so the way I'll do this is I'll come back here, and I'll apply this translation. Now it's coming as a 100% match. I'll confirm it. And let's say I'm going to go here into comments. I don't know if you see that, Maka. It's right besides the suggestions. So, and I'm going to leave dark mode. This is something pretty interesting. I like working in dark mode, but I'm going to leave night mode for now, just to show the comments.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
nice. So sometimes
so,
it's better to see it white, like it's more minimalistic sometimes.
mhm. Yeah, I typically work with everything in night mode, but yeah, sometimes I do like the changes as
Good.
well.
It's good to have
So if
the
I go,
option.
yeah, so if I go into comments and let's say, for instance, I write a note to you and I say, hey, Maka, I'm wondering whether you should use who or did in this case, and can you let me know? I submit this comment. Now you'll see this during the translation process, and you can always filter, for instance, for when you go into filters, you can filter for segments with comments, and it'll show you all the segments that do have a comment. So you can easily go through the file and see, okay, where is there anything that requires me to take a look at? And then you can go here and reply, and we can create a thread around that. So that's one way in which we can collaborate and uh, work together, resolving issues and things like that. And it's a
Great.
great question, by the way. And now that you're talking about comments, there's another way that we can collaborate. So in this scenario, let me unfilter here. In this scenario, we're trying to work together in the same file and the same workflow. So if we go back here to the project that we created, we're working in this scenario, Mac and I are both working in the translation workflow level. But there's also an option where, let's say, Maka and I are working in different capacities. Maka is working as a translator, and I'm reviewing. And I can be reviewing, let's say, for instance, let me confirm a few more segments here. Just as an example, let me confirm this, and this, and I'm going to confirm this, and this, and two more. I'm going to confirm this. And it's pretty cool, right? It's how the AI is trying to implement the glossary, how it's running the smells. I mean, I'm being able to translate. Obviously, I'm not making everything perfect, but I'm being able to translate fairly without a lot of human intervention. So I confirmed these first six segments. Now let's say Maka now is working as the reviewer, right? So if Maka works as the reviewer, she's going to open this. Notice that I just confirmed these segments. These segments are now populated. Now, if Maka starts making changes here, and say Maka decides to go back to day mode because she likes day mode better. So let's go turn off night mode. Okay, perfect. Maka says, okay, I want to see the preview. So she goes into web preview and goes into our site. So now we can see what our site is looking like during the translation process. And Maka decides to start making changes here. So let's say she goes into precios, and Maka says, yeah, I know precios is in the glossary, but I want to use something different. I want to change this to precificación, just as an example. Now, when I click out of it, BWX AI is also trying to, it's categorizing this as a terminology change automatically. And it's also providing a rough draft of the explanation, saying the translated word precios means prices in English, which is not the correct terminology for pricing. The correct translation for pricing is especificación. The review translation uses especificación. It's trying to justify the change that I made, regardless of whether it's right or wrong. It's trying to explain the rationale for the change I made. Now, let's say I mark this as reviewed. Now, if I go back and see changes, now I can see exactly what changed and the explanation for this change, right? But this is where it gets super interesting. And now let's make a few more changes here, just so we go through the process again. So let's say contáctenos. Let's say we want to find a different way to translate this. I'm going to ask the AI review button to suggest an alternative. And let's say it's suggesting contacto. And it's explaining why, right? The AI is explaining, like saying the suggested translation contacto is a more natural and commonly used term of expression for the word contact. Contactednos is a literal translation that may not be commonly used or understood for Spanish speakers. Contacto is simpler, more straightforward. It's giving the rationale for using contacto. I'm going to choose to accept that. So let's change here contacto. Again, when I click outside, it's going to try to categorize the change again as a terminology change, and it's explaining the rationale. And let's mark that as reviewed as well. Same. Let's do the same process for login, iniciar sesión. Let's ask AI for an alternative translation. The AI is suggesting acceder. Let's use this as well. And again, it's explaining why. I'm not going to go through the full explanation, but I do want to take a step back and just make sure that everybody's understanding the different components, right? So this component, the AI review, is suggesting an alternative translation to the same translation. When I enter that translation here, then we have something called the BWX quality professor that's trying to explain and take a look. The AI is flagging, please check the changes you made. It seems the original translation was better than the provided review. So we're getting aided by the AI as far as the changes that are being made. And it's explaining the change. It's saying the translated phrase iniciar sesión is the correct terminology for login in Spanish. The review translation is used as acceder, which is not the correct terminology. So let's revert this back to iniciar sesión and confirm this. In this case, we're not having a change. And now empiece ahora. Let's take a look at what the AI suggests here. And Maka, any questions regarding these mechanisms? I know it's a lot of different things going on at the same time.
No, it's I like that it's optional that we can either choose to use it or not. Maybe in some topics we feel super confident and we have been working in the topics for a long time and we don't need like this extra review. But maybe we are new with some clients or some working fields and we need like this extra pair of eyes, you know? So it's good to
Mm-hmm.
be able to choose, okay, I want to have an extra support or not. I don't
Mm-hmm.
need it and I'm fine with myself. Like it's good to have the option.
I agree. So let's make a change here to empiece. I added the word mismo. Let's see how it categorizes this. Now it's categorizing this as fluency. The review translation adds the word mismo, which means right now in English. And it's always taking the bias that the correction makes sense when trying to explain, because that's the assumption, right? If we make a change, the assumption is that the change makes sense. So let's mark this as reviewed. But again, what's interesting is if I go into changes here, I can see that I can agree or disagree with this. So now let's say I'm working on this file. I get to see Maka's changes through different ways. So one way I get to see these changes is in the review environment. I get access to this change report. So I can see Maca changed precios to precificación. And again, let me take this out of day mode just as an example. Same thing with the platform. You can work either in dark mode or day mode. So Maca changed precios to precificación. She changed contactesnos to contacto. And she changed empieza ahora to empieza ahora mismo, right? Now I can also show the comments, and I can open this in the editor as a separate user. And now I can look at these changes and I can react to these comments. And I can
Yeah,
say,
I'm surprised with that word precificación. I think it's Portuguese, not Spanish.
mm-hmm. No, and it's not. I'm not making changes that make any sense. It's just making
Oh, okay,
sense.
okay,
Yeah, it's not, and it's not suggested by the AI at all. I'm just adding things just to show different
okay.
different linguistic possibilities. So let's say, for instance, you disagree. I don't like this. I don't like this because this word sounds awkward in Spanish. Let's revert back to precios. So you can disagree with that, and now we can see this in the thread. If I go back here, both at the review level, I can see and show comments that there's a conflict here. that there's a, and in this case, I'm doing both, but you would see here, well, Gabriel is doing one change, Maka is suggesting another change. We have a conflict. Let's solve this conflict. Let's change this back to Precious. And now if we mark this as reviewed, now it's fine with the change. So just to clarify, right, we have different methods of talking to each other. We can talk in the threads, just adding comments, like, what do you think of this translation? Submit. So that's one way, and I just created the message over here. So that's one way to interact. The other way to interact is in the actual, when we're working in different workflows, is in the actual changes that are being made to the translation until we're happy with the change that's being made, and then we can move on. So again, want to pause over here and see if there are any questions regarding what we're doing.
Yes, we have one question here. It's not exactly what we are covering, but it's still the same topic.
Mm-hmm.
Alex asked, is it better to create multiple projects or just one when working with multiple people?
That's a good question. So my response would be definitely a single project because it's going to be hard to track if you start creating multiple projects. But just going into the different ways, right? We invited in this scenario, Mark and I are working as project managers in this project, right? So that's one scenario. We're accessing this. And notice that the project is pending. If I go into tasks, I don't have any tasks. But if I approve the project, and okay, if I approve the project, I'm going to confirm. Now BWX created these two different tasks, right? A translation task and a reviews task, and I can now assign this task to different translators. So this is a different way of working, is when you assign a task to a given vendor. And in that case, for instance, going back to your question, Rodrigo, is if you work with in this way, you could potentially split the file into many, many different parts and assign part one to vendor A, part B to translator B, part C to translator C, and so on. So in that case, the benefit is that it's easier for you to keep track of payables, log files, because everything is already working within the task framework. The downside is that you get less flexibility, right? So in the scenario where Maka and I were working as both project managers here, Maka can be working, for instance, on let's say one part of the file, and then she can jump down to another part of the file. She can go back to parts of the file that I was working on, make changes over my transition. It's entirely fluid, right? That's the scenario that we're describing. It's in a 100% fluid. Maka can make changes to me, I can make changes to her, and so on. It's like super fluid. We both have the same rights. In this scenario with the tasks that we were describing, then it's not fluid at all. Like if you ascribe to me segments 1 through 20, and let's say there's an overlap in the translation memory, I'll get to see that overlap, I'll get to benefit from that, but I won't be able to, let's say, change the segments that are belonging to another translator. So as far as ownership goes, it's a lot more restrictive. But the benefit of working this way is that then at the task level, you get to see exactly how these different tasks are completing and what's going on with them. Make sense, Rodrigo? Or
Yes. Yes.
Cool. Any other questions, or should we continue?
No questions so far.
Maka, any questions?
No, all good.
Okay, so let's go back again to the collaboration. Just let's do a quick recap again, because I know that I'm covering a lot of ground in a very little amount of time. So, concept number one, right, that we were showing is the translation memory is in green, the machine translation is in blue, and the glossary suggestion is in yellow, right? One of the beauties of AI is that we're trying to resolve differences in the translation memory and the glossary by using AI. And some of these resolutions will make sense, some won't. So, for instance, in the glossary, we taught it that work should be aga, which, just as an example, it's completely awkward and weird, but it's trying to flex the machine translation that's saying correctly trabaje con sus traductores. It's suggesting haga equipo con sus traductores o agencias o haga que nuestro sistema complete su trabajo de manera perfecta. It's sounding awkward, but it is trying its best to apply the glossary that we taught it, right? So the AI at the translation level is trying to resolve differences between the machine translation, the glossary, and when we do have a translation memory, in this case we don't because we didn't confirm the segment, it's trying to resolve these differences. So is that clear, Maka and Rodrigo, like the translation level, or anything that I should explain deeper here?
Well, it seems the AI is trying to, solve all the issues among all the sources. So and adding all the context and everything what we are adding into the adding to the glossary and things like that. Yeah, I think it's clear so far.
Cool. Then the second component of AI, and let's turn that on, is the AI review, which is proposing a change to a given translation. So we translated as servicios de traducción, and it's suggesting as servicios de idioma, and it's explaining why. So this is the second component. Now, the third component is the smells component. Let me make sure this is turned on. Translation smells is turned on. Okay. And let's just remove just call it servicios. Now smells is running, and it's okay with that because it's understanding that it's implied. Let's make a bigger change, and let's change this here. So it's detecting an incorrect translation. It's saying the translation escriba the model is incorrect, and it's suggesting what the correct translation should be. So smells is a semantic verifier looking at the quality of the sentence that we just translated. If we go into suggestions and if we go into QA issues and go into filters, this is what most of us translators understand as verifiers. It's basically these syntactical verifiers. So double spaces, empty segments, dilation. That's like the traditional verification process. In this case, we're also looking for deviations in meaning. So we have these three different layers, right? Layer one is the actual AI translation suggestion. Layer number two is the alternative translation suggestions. And layer number three is the semantic verification. Layer number four, which was what we were showing earlier, is, let me make sure that I open the right project. Again, when we open at the review level and we start making changes, let's ask AI for an alternative suggestion. It's happy with contacto. Let me look for a different example here. And review this, ask AI to suggest. Okay, it's suggesting acceder, again, as an example. And notice what's so cool, right? It's probably going to disagree again with this. It's the AI is flagging a potential error, and it's also trying to explain the nature of the change, which is what we call the quality professor. So the AI is interacting in a dialogical way with the translator at multiple different levels. And like Maka said, what's important is that the translator can at any point override this and say, no, this is not a terminology thing. This is a matter of fluency, and they can describe it, or they can. They always have the final say, right? So the AI is meant to be an aid, not be a decision maker. And again, I'm going to stop here and see if we have any questions.
Yes, we have one question here. It's Wendy, and again related to team. My users needed to set anything up, even after I've set up the glossary and everything else.
No, yeah, your users, assuming that you've gone here into your organizational unit, right? So notice that when I go into the project is going to inherit the transition memories and the glossaries that I've created in the organizational unit. So if I go here to BureauWorks, this is the organizational unit that we're working with. And if we go into translation memories, these are my translation memories, these are my glossaries. Notice that I only have this one applied as default and the only one checked. So it's not suggesting these other term bases. Translation memory, same thing. It's only using this one as read and write. So that's why that's the only one that we're using when we created the project. When we go into project, you can always at this point manually override this, and you can add an additional TM here, or you can add an additional glossary at the project level. But assuming that you've done this, Wendy, that you've set up your transition memories and your glossaries, then your users don't have to do anything. When they click, when either they get the task or when they go into the editor, their the glossaries and the translation memories are all going to be available here. Same applies, that wasn't part of the question, but same applies when you go to machine translation. So if I go into translation settings, and let's say I can enable machine translation as part of the project, that then it's also going to leverage machine translation as well. And as a user, I can define, like, let's say, for instance, I go into my account, MT settings. I can add different machine translation configurations for different providers. So let's say I can decide to work my English into Spanish legal with Microsoft, but my English into Spanish marketing with Depot, just as an example. I would have to have my credentials, which I would have to paste here or upload the JSON file that's generated by these services as the authentication mechanism. But once I do, I can basically also work with custom machine translation per project or per content vertical and so on. So, and again, as per Wendy's question, the people you invite to your project are going to inherit all of the configurations that you've set up as the project owner.
Nice, nice. Yeah, because in the end, when we are sharing a project, we are becoming a manager. So, in all these responsibilities about all this setup, so we have to be aware. I think what we are sharing, which areas in our projects we are sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the critical thing, right? BWX is very flexible. So the way we're talking about it, step one is, let's just take it back from the beginning. Step one is adding a user and defining if you want your user to be a project manager or a vendor. I'm not even going to go into the situation where, let's say, you want to give full account admin privileges to the user, because I imagine that's not going to be very often, unless you have, like, let's say, a partner or a manager, someone who you really want to trust entirely with your accounts. I wouldn't use the account admin. So you're basically inviting people either as a project manager or a vendor. The key distinction here, again, as a project manager, they're going to see everything that's on the screen. They're going to see, assuming that you give them the standard project manager role, they're going to be able to click on the translation, click on the review. They're going to be able to go, down to segment 33. They're going to be able to go to up to segment 11. They're going to be able to come in and make changes here. So it's like they have full fluidity over how they're going to work, right? The second scenario is when you add a user and you invite them as a vendor. As a vendor, there are a few preconditions. One is the project needs to be approved, just like this one is in green. And to approve a project, I'll show you again. Let me revert this project back to draft. If I revert it back to draft, notice that there are no tasks available and it's gray. Once I approve the draft, now it's in pending, it's in yellow. If I approve the project, now it'll create the tasks. So the key distinction is when you're working with vendors, you're working at the task level. When you're working with project managers, you're working at the project level. Again, if your goal is to be able to very granularly know exactly, let's say you, Mark, and me, Rodrigo, are working together on a project, and I want to create different tasks. So I want to create, one task for you, one task for Maka, one task for me, and I can go into payment details. It's fairly easy for me to calculate exactly what I owe you versus what I owe Maka versus what I owe me, as an example, right? Because we're working at the task level, so everything is very discrete, very formalized. If we're working as project managers, because we're not creating tasks, then we're not benefiting from this payment methodology mechanism. So we're not going to have, like in this scenario, like let's say we're going to have a project log file. So I can go and take a look at the project log file and I can see the entire log file for this project. But I'm not going to have a separate log file for Maka or a separate log file for me or a separate log file for you. So, maybe I'll prearrange and say, hey, guys, we're just going to split this project up. It's going to be $100 each. And who cares about the log file? We're going to work together. So that's one scenario. The other scenario, again, when we're working with our friends or translators or peers as vendors, then it becomes very discrete. So I can go into the payment details and I can define, okay, let's say I'm going to create a specific log file for this file, and I'm going to go into details here, and I'm going to create specific instructions, and I'm going to choose the exact assignee, and so on. And then I can create in payment details, I can create the exact amount owed to this user. Make sense?
Yes, yes, it's many layers of users. Of course, I think probably I will need to check the the knowledge base, but it's definitely the way I can see it's we can set up and let as granular as possible in a way that that may serve many different situations. I think.
Agree. Maka, any questions between the difference of sharing a project as project managers versus project manager vendor?
No, all good. I would like to ask a question to the audience and ask
Mm-hmm.
like what have been your biggest challenges when working with other colleagues, or maybe this is your first time and you're starting to you want to start collaborating with colleagues, and then what are your biggest fears or doubts, and maybe if the people share some of their biggest doubts or challenges that have faced, maybe we can try to show how you can solve them using BWX. And my my question, but it would be like a different topic. I'm not sure if you want to. It would be regarding payment. So I'm not sure
Mm-hmm.
if you want to like keep explaining something else, and then
No,
that's in the end.
let's talk about payment too. Mm-hmm.
So my question is, for example, let's say that okay, all worked good, the project is ready. Okay, it's payment time. How do we manage this? Do we only see the amount that we owe to each person? Can we pay through the platform?
It's a
Must
yeah,
we pay through the platform or can we choose?
perfect question. So, and to answer that, we need to go into pricing and take a look at the different plans that we have, and what these plans offer, right? So the personal plan, it's meant to up to 10 users, and it's not meant to manage payments. You'll definitely, you won't even have, let's say, the task management um, situation where I described. You're basically collaborating with people in a more informal basis as project managers. So
Sorry, Gabriel.
Mhm.
So with this first plan, I could work myself and nine more people,
Correct. And with
but
each
for
person that you
$9.
add, $9
Ah,
each.
okay,
Correct.
okay.
Correct. And then in this situation, the idea is it's meant as a personal plan. So the idea is that you're not working as an agency. So you're working informally. So it's like, let's say me, you, and Rodrigo, we're working as friends, and we're working at this level that I described here. We're sharing the project, and we're agreeing amongst each other, and we're saying, hey, Maka, you take the first part of the document, I'll take the latter, Rodrigo takes the middle, and the client's paying us $1,000, and we're going to split it three ways, and so on. So it's like the personal plan is meant to be informal, right? That's the premise behind it. It's not, you're not working as an agency. The next level up, which would be a business and an agency, and it starts at $80 a month because it presupposes a minimum of 10 active users. Then you have the tasks available, and you also have the payables and the receivables. So in this case, things are different, right? So then in this case, let's say you're working at the task level, then what's going to happen is if I go into the payment details, and once I have like a word rate established, then I can also configure what we call in settings here, net rate settings. I can define exactly how I want my log files to be created, and that's like a whole other theme. But basically, there's a room for, you can either set the payables manually, where you can define, okay, I'm going to pay Gabriel $100 for this task, or you can configure BWX so that it knows what to pay a user based on the work that was performed. So we can measure effort basically. But again, that's a whole other topic. But let's assume the simple scenario where you're going into tasks and you're saying, okay, I'm going to attribute this to Gabriel. Here. This is an example. I'm going to attribute this to you to reviewupyourworks.com. And then I'm going to go into payment details, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to pay them $100. It's actually going to calculate this automatically. So it's words, and I'm going to pay them here. So it's calculating exactly what I need to pay them. Once I hit save, once their job is completed, it's going to calculate the payment based on what I defined. So in this case, 10 cents per word. And that's going to create in accounting a payable for that given translator, right? So that's what the business plan does. The business plan allows you to work with tasks and allows you to create specific amounts to be paid for different users. And you can sync this directly with an account or bookkeeping system like Xero or QuickBooks. We integrate directly with Xero, but you can integrate the API with QuickBooks, for instance, as well. So in this case, it flows all the way through creating a purchase order and a payable invoice to a translator, right? As far as having to pay through the platform, you have no obligation to run payments through the platform. In fact, in the business plan, you cannot. But in the enterprise plan, you can pay people directly through the platform. So the big difference here is that you can let's say decide to not only have all of these payables, but we integrate with Payoneer and PayPal so that you can process payments directly with basically a few different buttons and statuses of invoices. You'll be able to say, okay, I approve this payment and push the payment over through PayPal. So those are the three different levels, right? Level one, the informal way. Level two is, let's say, the more task based way, and level three is the fully automated way.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I was asking because I used an online tool once, and then we discovered that we had to pay through the tool
Mm-hmm.
after working on the project, and it was like a surprise. And then
Mm-hmm.
we started like a conversation with them, and we weren't very satisfied about that, so that's why I was asking. It was a
That's a
problem
great question.
I had once.
It's a good question.
And then, sorry, Rodrigo, do you want me to read John's question?
I think
Did
Rodrigo
you find
Santos
it?
is it. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. You you
Yes,
can read it.
because John is asking or saying that his biggest fear is not maintaining the client's style when we work or collaborate as a team. And
Mm-hmm.
here I would say that this is not up to the tool we use so much, but I think it depends on having a pre conversation with the team, like maybe a brief style guide, and saying like, okay, this is the client style. Let's all agree on this, and then start working using the tool. And of course, the tool give us like the translation memory and the term base, which are going to help us maintain consistency. But I think it's more like a pre-work, this knowing the style and then keeping the style.
I agree, Maka. AI does add a lemon twist to this because typically, yes, let's say the TMs and the glossaries are more for consistency than they necessarily capable of introducing a style flavor, right? One thing that's interesting is because the AI is learning from what we're confirming and from the glossary, if we start to confirm segments then that are written in a more formal way, the suggestions tend to become more formal. And if we tend to be more informal, for instance, the suggestions will tend to become more informal. One thing that's important to remember is that, let's say here, we have a context match, right? So it's a perfect syntactic match between the English that's here and the translation, what we have in the translation memory. But we're also looking for low level matches that don't show up in the editor. So, like 10%, 20% matches, because we can make use of that from an AI perspective. And we're also looking for what we call semantic matching, which is closer to like what we do as a concordance search when we look for a specific term in a TM. So I can go here, for instance, and I can type the word translation and full text search, and I can see, okay, how is the word translation used in the translation memory, even if I don't have like a fuzzy match for the sentence. So the AI is doing that, and it's learning from that. So one big benefit of collaborating when you have the AI turned on is that the suggestions are taking the translation memory and the glossary a step further as far as promoting this unity in style. It's not going to solve everything. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Monica. You need people to be properly briefed and in agreement of what the approach is going to be. But the AI does make it a lot easier as far as making sure that people are following a similar style. Another comment, just because I think it's a great question, is when you create your users and invite people to work with you, for instance, one thing to me that makes a lot of sense typically when you're working with different people is if I go into users and let's say, well, I know this client. I've been working with this client for 5 years. Naka has never worked with this client. I can go into permissions and I can go into editor and I can say, well, Maka cannot add terms to the glossary and Maka cannot change the glossary or do this or do that. And in this case, she's a project
Mm.
manager, so she can do all of that. But let's say I change her role as a vendor, remove the project manager role, and then I can start changing all of these more granular permissions, which allow me to control and say, okay, I'm the leader of the project. I get to add terms. Maka doesn't first, or the opposite. So, but that's a great question, and I think there's so much of collaboration lies in this ability to ensure that a certain style is being preserved.
Thank you, Gabriel. And then can everyone download the translated file? Is
Oh yeah,
that something that we can
yeah.
choose who can download it, or just everyone can?
Again, yeah, in this case, for instance, as a project manager, I can click here and download the original file or the translated file here. I can also download it from the translation editor itself. But I, again, like you said, Maka, I can define that in users. I can define exactly who gets to download the file, for instance, or not. So
Oh,
in
cool.
project, for
Nice.
instance, I can define exactly here who can download the reference file or download the final file and so on. So there's a lot of you basically get to define exactly who gets to do what. But great questions. Any other questions, Rodrigo, Mark? I think we're almost reaching time. So, but I really had a great session with both of you. But I think we have time for maybe one or two more last questions in case we do have them.
We don't have any
I don't see any
questions.
more questions
Uh,
in the chat.
Cool. Hopefully that's a good sign. And I really want to thank both of you for your time. Always great chatting with both of you. Want to invite everybody who's watching to, if you haven't tried it out, try out our free trial. 14 days for free on us. One thing that's super important, I always emphasize this: if you do the free trial, I highly encourage you to go into my account and to enable your translation and review. And can't emphasize this enough. When you do enable this, you do get a data privacy and security warning. We are exchanging, the AI does exchange data with OpenAI API and Azure OpenAI service. And the key things just to keep in mind from a security perspective is that when you do enable that, your data is not available to other customers. It's not available to OpenAI, not used to improve OpenAI models, not used to improve any Microsoft or third-party products and services, not used to automatically improving Azure or OpenAI models, and it's basically exclusive for your use. So it's fairly, and you can go through it in detail, but both Azure and OpenAI, when you're sharing data through API, they're pretty good, in my opinion, about ensuring that security and privacy are well respected. But again, we do want to, we do like to flag it to our users whenever there is any kind of situation where data is shared with a third party. And if you enable the AI, then it will be. So that's something very important. If you don't enable this, then all of the features that I was showing as far as AI, suggestions, smells, then they won't be available for you in the translation editor.
nice.
And I would like to ask that it's a very good idea to try everything before starting a real project. So the free trial is a great idea to like try a mock project maybe with one or two colleagues that we want to collaborate with. And then when the real project arrives, we are ready.
That's a very important suggestion, Maka, and I can't reiterate what you're saying enough. I think a lot of us tend to try things already when the water is up our necks, and then Murphy's law starts hitting. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong, and it gets a lot harder. So um, I definitely echo your sentiment, and I think it's super important to try things out with no pressure situation so that it's more on an exploration level. And if you do like it and if you feel comfortable with it, then start running a few of your real projects in it until you love it.
Great, great. So yeah, I think we are done for today. So thank you everyone again, and I hope we can meet again next Wednesday.
Yep. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Maka. Super big pleasure seeing both of you again. And thank you for all your time. And really loved being here with everybody.
Thank
Thank you. Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.